Nobody on Cahuenga Boulevard that Tuesday morning in November 1971 looked twice at the man in the denim jacket. He had his hands shoved into his pockets, his collar turned up against the thin California wind, and his round wire glasses catching the pale morning light. He walked with his head slightly down, not the walk of a man without purpose, but the walk of a man who did not want to be found. He had been in Los Angeles for 11 days. He already wanted to leave. Then he heard it. Not from a radio, not drifting from a passing car window, not piped through a speaker above a shop door. It was coming from a boy, maybe 11 years old, maybe 12, pressed flat against the glass of Manny's Music on Cahuenga Boulevard, his forehead nearly touching the window. Inside, hanging on a velvet display mount under a single spotlight, was a 1960 Gibson Les Paul Standard in sunburst finish. The price tag read $1,200. The boy was staring at it the way people stare at things they've already decided they will never have. And his lips were moving. The melody was barely a whisper, just breath shaped into notes, hardly loud enough to hear over the foot traffic and the diesel groan of a bus pulling away from the curb. But the man in the denim jacket heard it. He stopped walking. His right foot came down on the concrete and did not lift again. Because what that boy was humming, in a thin and unsteady voice, standing against a music shop window, with no shoes that fit and no one watching over him, was "Don't Let Me Down." His song, John Lennon's song, the one he had written in 1969 at the worst moment of his life, when the Beatles were already dying and he was too exhausted and too heartbroken to pretend otherwise. The one that was never a proper hit. The one that most people, even people who called themselves fans, had never truly heard at all. And this boy, this small, homeless boy with dark circles under his eyes and a jacket 3 sizes too large, was humming the bridge. The real bridge, the one that broke upward before it fell. For a long moment, no one moved. John Lennon stood 2 feet behind the boy on a Los Angeles sidewalk and could not take a single step. The city moved around him, a woman with a paper grocery bag, a man in a suit checking his watch, pigeons scattering off a power line overhead. But John did not move. Something in that melody had reached inside his chest and closed around something he thought he'd buried. But that moment didn't start there. To understand why that song stopped a legend, cold on a Tuesday morning in 1971, you have to understand who that boy was, and what it had already cost him just to still be standing. If you've ever felt like music was the only thing that truly understood you, you're going to want to stay for every second of this story. Like this video, hit subscribe, and don't go anywhere, because what happens next will remind you why some meetings are not accidents. John Lennon is standing 2 feet behind a homeless boy on a Los Angeles sidewalk. And the boy is humming a song that John has not been able to listen to in 2 years, because the last time he heard it, everything he had built his life around was already gone. Instead of breaking him open, that melody does something he does not expect. It stops him completely. Because buried inside that child's voice is something John recognizes, not music, something older than music, something he thought had died. Pull the camera back. November 1971. John Lennon is 31 years old, and he is tired in a way that sleep cannot fix. The Beatles have been officially dead for 18 months, dissolved through lawyers and press statements and public accusations that dragged through the papers like a slow funeral nobody knew how to stop attending. The band that had changed the sound of the entire world ended not with a final concert or a farewell record, but with legal documents and silence. John had signed the papers in December 1970. He had not felt relief. He had felt nothing, which was somehow worse. He came to Los Angeles for business, meetings with his manager Alan Klein at the Beverly Wilshire, some studio time booked at Record Plant West. But he kept skipping the meetings. He would call Yoko from the hotel phone and say he'd be back by noon, and then noon would pass, and he would still be walking. He walked through Laurel Canyon at dawn, when the eucalyptus trees dripped fog onto the road. He walked through Hollywood Cemetery reading headstones. He walked because John Lennon had always walked when the noise inside his head became too loud to sit with. Liverpool streets at 15, Hamburg alleyways at 19, now Sunset Boulevard at 31. Walking was not escape, it was maintenance. What was eating him had a name. Don't Let Me Down was recorded live on the rooftop of the Apple Corps building on January 30th, 1969, the last time the Beatles ever performed in public. John had written it for Yoko. He wrote it fast and desperate, the way you write something when you're not sure there will be time to finish it properly. It was a plea dressed as a love song. It charted briefly as a B-side and then disappeared. Most people forgot it existed. John never forgot it, because that rooftop was the last morning he stood beside his bandmates and felt, for 3 minutes and 30 seconds, that everything might still be all right. It wasn't. And he had not been able to listen to that song since. Now, a homeless boy on a Los Angeles sidewalk is humming it back to him, note for note, bridge for bridge, and John Lennon cannot decide whether that is the cruelest thing the universe has ever done to him or the most important. John didn't clear his throat. He didn't wave or step around to make himself visible. He just spoke, quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for the boy to hear. "You got the bridge wrong." The boy spun around so fast he nearly lost his footing. He was younger up close, 11 maybe, with dark hair falling across his forehead and brown eyes that went wide the instant he registered a stranger standing directly behind him. His whole body reacted before his mind did. One step back toward the glass. Hands coming up slightly, not to fight but to shield. It was a reflex so practiced and so automatic that it told John everything he needed to know about how this child had been living. "I wasn't doing anything," the boy said immediately, his voice tight and defensive. "I was just standing here. I'm leaving." "I know," John said. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm talking about the song, the bridge. It goes up on the third note before it comes down. You were bringing it down too early." The boy stared at him. He was trying to place the face, the round wire glasses, the long hair, something familiar and impossible about the jaw and the eyes. His brain was working through it in real time, and John could see the exact moment the calculation started. "How do you know how it goes?" the boy asked, suspicion sharpening his voice. "Because I wrote it," John said simply. Silence dropped between them, like something physical. A city bus rolled through the intersection without stopping. A woman with a stroller moved around them on the sidewalk without looking up. The boy's expression did not crack into excitement or disbelief. Instead, he went very still. The stillness of someone who had learned that hope was expensive, and he could not afford to spend it carelessly. Then quietly he said, "The bridge always felt like the saddest part." John was not prepared for that answer. He looked at the boy, really looked, and what he saw made something shift behind his ribs. This story is just getting started, and the next section will break your heart wide open. Hit that like button, subscribe, and keep watching, because what this boy says next stops John Lennon completely cold. John Lennon asks the boy his name. The answer he gets takes less than 3 seconds to say, but what comes after it, the story behind it, the loss inside it, is going to take everything John has just to sit still and hear. They don't go far. There's a diner 2 doors down from Manny's Music, with a torn vinyl awning and a handwritten specials board in the window. John holds the door open. Danny walks through it slowly, like someone who has learned to check exits before sitting down anywhere. They take a corner booth. John orders 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and 2 Cokes without asking what Danny wants, because it is obvious the boy has not eaten since yesterday, and possibly the day before that. Danny eats the way people eat when they are not sure when the next meal is coming. Fast, without looking up, one hand resting on the edge of the plate. John waits. The story comes in pieces, the way stories always do when someone has not been asked to tell it in a very long time. Danny's mother was a session musician. Piano. She worked the studios in Burbank, background recordings, jingle tracks, the invisible labour that held the music industry together from underneath, while other people's names filled the album sleeves. She brought Danny to the studio whenever she could. He grew up sitting on a folding chair in the corner of recording booths, listening to music being assembled from the inside out, learning without knowing he was learning. Her name was Carol Reed. She died of a brain aneurysm on March 3rd, 1971, a Tuesday. Danny came home from school and found her on the kitchen floor. He was 11 years old. His father had left the family 3 years earlier and left no forwarding address. There was no other family in Los Angeles. A neighbour called the county. Danny spent 6 weeks in a group home before he ran. He had been on the streets since April, 7 months living in doorways and church shelters, and once, for 2 weeks in October, sleeping behind the dumpster at the back of a grocery store on Vine Street, because the nights had turned cold faster than he expected. The week before she died, Carol Reed sat at the piano in their apartment on Fountain Avenue and played Don't Let Me Down 3 times in a row. She didn't know all the words, just the melody. And the bridge, the real bridge, the one that rose before it fell. She played that part over and over, like she was trying to memorize something she somehow knew she would not have time to finish. John's hand has gone completely still on the tabletop. He is not looking at Danny anymore. He is looking at the middle distance, at something that exists only in 1969, on a rooftop in London, in the last 3 minutes of something that would never come back. John Lennon has heard thousands of stories in his life. He has sat across from presidents and poets and people who wanted things from him that he could not give. But he has never sat across from an 11-year-old boy who lost his mother to a song that was written as a prayer, and felt, with absolute certainty, that he is the reason this child is still standing outside that music shop window every single morning. John is quiet for a long time after Danny finishes, long enough that the diner fills the silence around them, the hiss of the griddle, the clatter of a plate being set down 2 booths over, the tinny radio above the counter playing something neither of them is listening to. Danny watches John's face, the way children watch the faces of adults when they are trying to calculate whether they have said too much. He has told this story before, pieces of it, to shelter workers and county officials and strangers who asked and then looked away. He knows the expression people make when they have heard enough. He starts to pull back. He straightens slightly in the booth. He begins assembling the face he wears on the street, the one that gives nothing away and asks for nothing back. Then John stands up. Danny looks up at him, uncertain. "Come on," John says. "Where?" Danny asks. "To fix the bridge." They walk back out onto Cahuenga Boulevard, and John moves with purpose now, no longer the man with his head down and his collar turned up against being recognized. He holds the door of Manny's Music open, and Danny walks through it and stops in the middle of the floor and simply breathes. The smell hits him first, lacquer and old wood and the sharp metallic bite of fresh nickel wound strings. To Danny, it smells like his mother's studio in Burbank, like Tuesday mornings before everything changed. He stands very still with his eyes closed for just a moment, and John does not rush him. Then John walks to the counter. He does not announce himself. He does not smile or perform. He points to the sunburst Gibson Les Paul hanging in the window display and says, quietly and without drama, "Take that down, please." The salesman's hands tremble slightly as he lifts it from the mount. He has recognized John. He is professional enough not to say so. He sets the guitar on the counter and steps back. John picks it up, tunes it by ear in under a minute, and carries it across the floor to where Danny is standing. He holds it out without a word. Danny does not take it. He stares at it. "I can't," he says. "You're not keeping it yet," John says. "You're borrowing it for 60 seconds. Play me the bridge, the right way this time." Don't go anywhere. What happens in the next 60 seconds inside that music shop? What John Lennon does the moment Danny stops playing. Nobody who was standing in that store ever forgot it for the rest of their lives. Danny Reed takes the guitar. His hands find the neck, so with a muscle memory that 7 months on the streets has not been able to erase. He plays the bridge, the real bridge, the one that rises before it falls, and John Lennon closes his eyes. And when Danny finishes, John reaches into the inside pocket of his denim jacket and pulls out something that has absolutely nothing to do with music. What John pulls from the inside pocket of his denim jacket is a folded square of notepaper. He sets it on the glass counter beside the guitar without explanation. Then he turns to the salesman and says, "Box it up. The case too." Danny's voice breaks open. "You can't—" "Already done," John says. The notepaper has a name written on it in blue ink. Dr. Harold Stern, UCLA, Child Welfare Division. Below the name, a phone number. Below that, 4 words in John's handwriting. Small, slightly slanted, pressed hard into the paper like he meant every letter. He plays. Place him. John folds Danny's fingers around the note and holds them closed for a moment. "That man will find you somewhere real," he says. 4 walls, a bed, a school that will take you. You call that number today, not tomorrow today, and you tell him John rang ahead. You are not to be lost in the system. You are to be placed with someone who will not lose you. Danny is crying now, not loudly. The silent kind, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep that the body can barely carry it to the surface. He presses the back of his hand against his mouth. "Why?" he manages. "Why are you doing this?" John is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "Because someone should have done it for your mother. She spent her whole life playing music for other people's names. The least the world owes her is making sure her son gets a name worth knowing." He places one hand briefly on top of Danny's head. Just a second, just the weight of a hand, and then he puts his glasses back on, turns his collar up, and walks out the door without looking back. Danny Reed stands alone in the middle of Manny's music, with a guitar case at his feet and a folded piece of paper in his fist. And for the first time in 7 months, he is not afraid. Danny made the call that afternoon from a payphone on Cahuenga Boulevard. Dr. Harold Stern answered on the second ring. He had already been contacted. He already knew. Within 3 weeks, Danny was placed with a foster family in Pasadena, a music teacher named Patricia Holloway and her husband, Raymond. The first evening Danny arrived, Patricia heard him play in the spare room after dinner. She sat at the kitchen table afterward and did not speak for a long time. Then she said quietly to her husband, "We are going to need to get that boy proper lessons." Danny Reed studied guitar through junior high and all 4 years of high school. In 1978, he received a full scholarship to Berklee College of Music in Boston. He graduated in 1982. He spent the next 3 decades as a session guitarist, the same invisible labour his mother had given, playing on albums whose sleeves carried other people's names. He never became famous. He never tried to. What he became was the man who taught. In 1991, Danny opened a free music program for homeless and foster children in East Los Angeles. He called it The Bridge. Named, he told every new student, after the part of a song that goes up before it falls. The part most people get wrong. The part that matters most. By 2005, more than 400 children had walked through its doors. John Lennon was killed on December 8, 1980. He never spoke publicly about Danny Reed. No interview, no mention. One morning, one note, one guitar case clicked shut. But on the wall of the bridge, above the spare guitar rack, hangs a framed square of notepaper. 4 words in faded blue ink. He plays. Place him. Below it, in Danny's handwriting, one line added years later. She played too. We just didn't know her name. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like, subscribe and tell me in the comments. What song has ever stopped you completely cold?